If you want to really improve your organization, you need to look for examples of excellence. And that's hard. The examples of the ordinary are everywhere. Identifying who is best can be a challenge sometimes because they may not be that obvious that they are. You really have to dig and search and ask questions about people that are going beyond that simple compliance and are examples of that early innovators in something that's really going to help transform the organization. That's why they're doing it.
Hey, and welcome to the Electrical Safety Podcast. I'm your host, John Travis, and today I've got Lanny Floyd with me. Lanny, it's good to talk to you again.
Good to be here, John.
So, you've been busy lately. You mentioned you've been at the IEEE conference and need a power test, and something that you've been thinking about, which I've been curious to ask you about and to talk about here today, is just looking kind of broadly across, occupational safety and how historically we were doing a great job bringing the numbers of fatalities down. And then in the last maybe 10 to 15 years, things have kind of flatlined. And so with that introduction, if you could just kind of jump in and let people know, where, how your thought process led you to this and what you've been thinking about, and maybe where you think we need to go here.
Okay, John. Well, I guess let's start back at the beginning of the in the United States, the passage of the Occupational Safety and Health Act. That was in 1970. It was signed into law by President Richard Nixon in December of 1970. That year, in the United States, there were about 15,000 occupational fatalities from all causes. Okay. Last year, with a workforce of at least double, I don't have the exact numbers on the size of the workforce comparing 1970 to 2024, but last year there were about 5,000 occupational fatalities in the U.S. And so the work that's been done over the last 50 years around OSHA regulations, the industry standards that have been spawned by the OSHA regulations, such as NFPA 70E and other standards, have all helped made a significant difference in reducing fatalities. It hasn't been just the safe work practices that's in the OSHA regulations or the NFPA standards. It's also, there's been a tremendous evolution in technology that has introduced inherently safer installations. In the U.S., it's been the requirements for equipment ground on 120 volt circuits, the requirement for GFCIs in certain environments that are more likely to have electric shock risk. Mm-hmm. All of that has had all those things, and many other design things such as current limiting fuses and other technology as well. But the downward trend that has been very significant since 1970 in overall hazards and in electrical fatalities in particular started flattening about 15 years ago. In other words, we have a downward trend, and then we have a floor. Mm-hmm. For electrical hazards in the United States, that number of fatalities over the last 15 years has been about 150 to 160 a year. That's based on the U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics, keeps track of these sort of things. And it's, what that tells me and others that have been looking at this from the overall fatality rate, not just electrical, but overall, is that the tools and techniques that enabled us to achieve that long downward trend in reducing fatalities is not everything we need to go forward. In other words, those things are still very important. The OSHA regulations, NFPA 70, and in Canada, the Z462 and other things like that are extremely important. But the flattening trend is suggesting that we need to do something in addition to that. And in the U.S., some major safety organizations such as OSHA, the National Safety Council, the American Society of Safety Professionals, all are pointing toward, I'll call it methods that incorporate more risk assessment into the safety management process, in addition to compliance with regulations and standards. In fact, the director of OSHA, his statement was that he said, and I'll paraphrase it, he said that in order for U.S. employers to get better at reducing fatalities and injuries, we need to go beyond just simply complying with regulations and standards, but to incorporate risk assessment. And other countries that have done that for decades, and that includes countries like, all of the countries in the European Union, the UK, France, Belgium, Germany, the Netherlands, and others, all have a lower occupational fatality rate than the United States.
Mm.
And it's maybe due to a number of things. If it was a simple answer, we probably would be very quickly jumping onto that silver bullet, but it's not a silver bullet. But one thing that is different in the UK is for more than 40 years, they have put more emphasis on risk assessment after complying with the minimum requirements of codes and regulations. I call that it's the residual risk. The residual risk is the risk that's left after you've done the things that you feel it's important to do to reduce the risk.
Mm-hmm.
But then the opportunity is to step back and question, have we taken that residual risk down to as low as reasonable? And simply complying with regulations and standards doesn't go far enough. You need to ask the question, how could the controls we've already put in place fail? Is there something else we could do to address that potential failure? And that's a continuous cycle. It could be different for every job, every task, every workplace, because things are different. You have different workers, we may have different equipment, we may have different experiences, different work environments. All those things make it a little different. So the minimum requirements are just that, the minimum. We need to look at what is unique about this particular situation, and what is it we need to do. Maybe we do a little different. And it doesn't have to be costly. It doesn't have to be expensive or take time to do it. It could be simply having a conversation. And we call them job safety briefings. And if we expand that thought just a little bit, it is to engage at that moment, that job safety briefing, with the people who are going to be doing the work, the people know how work gets done, along with supervision or a safety coach to go along with that, is how could things go wrong here?
Mm-hmm.
What could we do different? In addition to the things we already have in place. I've seen so many examples. I've had it in my own experience when I was supervising a power distribution crews in my job with DuPont, where simply stopping and asking and engaging in a dialogue, you can very quickly see that, if we do this, that could help us prevent making a mistake.
Mm-hmm.
It's easy to make a mistake. The most competent person, most qualified person can make a mistake on any given day. And maybe it's, for lots of different reasons.
Yeah.
And the equipment could be different. There may be something unusual. Maybe this is a model of equipment that no one's here on this task has ever actually worked on before.
Mm-hmm.
That's true with many contractors that go into a customer's facilities, that where they're every day they're maybe in a different work environment, different vintage equipment, simply because you know everything about a certain manufacturer's model. Say motor starter, for example, the one you're looking at right today in front of you may be a little different.
Yeah. Something that, so jumps out at me, or something I'm thinking about, is so you go back to 50 years ago, and the incidents are higher, fatalities are higher.
Yeah.
Bring it down finally to a certain level. You said around 160 per year. So, and this is over the last 10 to 15 years. Have you ever looked at, or has anyone ever looked at, like, that's excuse me, you're saying all electrical fatalities, but it's across all organizations, correct?
Yeah, it's not just electricians. About half of that number is electricians. The rest are list any kind of job function and you can think of, and they are probably represented
Yeah.
in that fatality because everyone's exposed to electrical hazards in some, maybe a little bit, in their daily work activity.
Here's the thought. So you mentioned DuPont. I feel like there's a tipping point with organizations where, because if you're imagine you're a small 7-person company, and you're an electrical contractor. You might take a safety course once every 3 years or something like that, but your main focus is probably getting more work, finishing work faster, things like that. As a company, like I said, there's a tipping point. Let's say it's 100 employees. I don't even know what it would be. At some point, a company gets to a certain size where now you have a person dedicated to thinking about health and safety, or maybe there's enough exposure. The safety organizations in your jurisdiction are now, oh, that company's big enough, we're going to go visit them once in a while and see how they're doing. So external forces are kind of making safety more of a priority. So up back to those numbers, has anyone ever looked at that? What's kind of the spread? And I don't know how you'd split it, but it's, let's just say small business to big business. Has anyone looked at that, or is there numbers there at all?
Yeah, yes, they have, and I don't have that data right in front of me, but I can speak to that in general. Most people work for small business. Small businesses employ more people than large businesses total in the United States anyway.
Yeah.
And it is true that large organizations have the capability and resources to have dedicated people looking at, let's say, electrical safety,
Mm-hmm.
or safety in a bigger context, and they're educated and trained and experienced in things such as risk assessment, hazard identification. It may not be unique to electrical, but again, the processes you use to manage exposure to hazards that can cause serious injury and death are not necessarily unique to electrical hazards. Okay, there's a whole movement that's been around for at least 15 years called serious injury and fatality prevention, and that's it's a subset of safety management that just focuses on hazards that have high credibility for causing fatality. And electrical is one of those. Working in heights is one of those. Working in kind of confined space is one of those. But a lot of the work we do on an everyday basis, although it may cause injury and may cause serious, painful injuries, are not likely to cause fatalities. Most of the injuries in the U.S. That cause lost time injuries are ergonomic related, back sprains, and also things such as slips, trips, and falls on the same level. Can cause an injury, can break a bone, but not likely to be a cause of fatality. The electrical, on the other hand, 1 in 13 lost time injuries from electrical exposure is fatal. That's based on Electrical Safety Foundation analysis. That data comes from. So let's see. I think I've lost the point of your question, so I may divert on that.
Yeah, just back to
Yeah.
small business.
Oh yes.
Versus
So yeah. So OSHA has recognized that for a long time. That the big challenge in reducing injuries further is helping small organizations who may not have all the resources to manage safety that like a large company, as you pointed out, do. And also, we're just trying to stay afloat and make the payroll
Yep.
and that sort of thing. But OSHA published 2 documents in 2016. These are not regulations, but they're documents designed to help small businesses manage safety in a way similar that a large corporation that had deep pockets and deep resources in safety management. One is it's OSHA publication 3885, and it's titled Recommended Practices for Recommended Practice for Safety and Health Programs. That's the title, and it's free. You can download it. The other one is a corollary to that is OSHA publication 3886, and it's titled Recommended Practices for Safety and Health in Construction. All right. Basically the same documents, but the one in construction uses some terms and examples and language that are unique to the construction industry. And it's also important that from electrical exposures, the construction industry in the U.S. suffers half of the electrical fatalities of all industries in the United States. And construction is only about 7% of the workforce. So 7% of the workforce having half of the electrical injuries and fatalities says something about managing risk in the construction environments.
Yeah.
And a lot of those construction companies are small. They're working as subcontractors for a bigger general contractor, or they're out, working on their own without any resources. Anyway, those 2 documents are written in a way that is intended to be helpful to these small organizations with, as few as 25 employees or less, or for any organization. And they're modeled after the safety management standards such as ANSI Z10 and ISO 45001, which are really intended for the organizations who have dedicated safety resources to help guide and coach the organization in the implementation of those standards.
Right.
But the 2 OSHA documents recognize, and they were created recognizing that most organizations don't have that capability.
So, okay, so where my thoughts were going was you got it kind of coming down to a certain point where it flatlines. Now,
Yeah.
That was my thinking, was that, well, you've got a whole bunch of really small businesses that are more focused. Now, it's not that they don't value safety, but as a small business owner, they're probably thinking like, well, I've got 5,000 things I need to think about, and safety is one of them. And they're probably, I would just guess, 9 times out of 10, they're going to say, what do I need to absolutely do? So they're going to focus on compliance. And hopefully, 9 times out of 10 might even be high, but hopefully they've got the compliance set.
Well, compliance will take you a long way towards achieving the level of safety that most people want. Okay.
Right.
And if you're not complying with the regulations and standards, then you need to start there.
Yeah.
You need to bring your practices, your policies into compliance.
Yeah. So actually, when you think about it, I wonder, is there more? Is the answer, and I don't know, is the answer that we need to go past compliance, or is the answer there's still a fairly large pocket of organizations that aren't at compliance, and that
both of those statements are true in my experience. There's a lot of I've investigated accidents in the U.S. where the people involved, the electricians involved, when they're asked a question, what is OSHA? They can't answer that question.
Mm-hmm.
And that's kind of an extreme, but it's real. And it shows you some of the challenges we have when we get into NFPA 70E, which is a tremendous resource and is in reducing risk to electrical exposures. Um, I see people cherry picking. Well, we always do that, but we don't do that.
Yes.
Don't do this. And again, there's the 70E is not a regulation. It's not a law.
Right.
It's a industry standard of practices that will reduce exposure to electrical hazards. One of the challenges, John, and it's more true for small organizations, I think, and that is it is a fact that electrical injuries and fatalities are relatively rare. When you look at the total injuries and fatalities that occur in the U.S., again, I said that there's about 5,000 fatalities in the workplace each year in the U.S. 150 of those are electrical. That's a very small number compared to the total. And so just to give you an example, in DuPont, where I worked back in the 80s, we were through the 70s and 80s, we were experiencing a fatality about every 2.5 years. That may seem like a lot, and it was for us. That was when we recognized that was a lot, but that's a workforce of about 100,000 people.
Mm-hmm.
All right. If you were a workforce of 1,000 people, that would mean you would have an electrical fatality every 275 years. That's not a realistic comparison because that's almost unthinkable too, that you can't think of your operations in that context.
Yeah.
My point is they're relatively rare. And because of that rare frequency, you can have an organization may think that we're doing everything we need to do to prevent an electrical injury or electrical fatality. Our program is good. What's real, though, is it's mostly due to luck rather than the quality of the program. One of the highly respected safety gurus currently today, is a gentleman by the name of Todd Conklin. He said, I think in several of his books, and I've heard him speak at conferences, he said that safety is not the absence of injuries. Safety is the presence of controls. And so the controls are those things that are in the regulations and standards, the safe work practices, the use of PPE, the job risk assessments, the job safety briefings, all the lockout, tagout, creating an electrical safe work condition. All those are examples of controls. And and it's easy to check off, we got that, those controls. But again, it's about what can we do to improve those controls? Are we sure the quality is as good as we think they are? Are people doing this every time? The answer is maybe not, probably not, maybe never, if we go down to individual requirements. So the concept of looking at your controls that you're using to prevent exposure to hazardous electrical energy is really important. And it's not just a one-time look at it. It's continuously looking at every aspect of your program to see what can we do to improve that aspect.
Yeah, I mean, that's something that I've just found, speaking with different companies, and maybe it's a health and safety person, maybe it's a maintenance manager or something like that. But if I went into 100 different companies right now that actually had, let's say, electrical safety programs written, because that not everybody's even got them written, but they have them written, and we opened it up and we started to go through it, and I just asked them some basic questions on those topics. My feeling is that it would only be 5 to 10% of the people I would be speaking to who truly understood what was in there.
Right.
And so then I always think about, like, well, it's fantastic that we have this written down, but what are we actually doing? What are the workers actually doing to make sure that they're staying safe?
Right. Excellent question, and that's a very fundamental one. I think that's relevant to today and what we need to do to further improve electrical safety. In Canada, in Z462, and in the U.S. in ANSI in 70E, NFPA 70E, both have some statements. They're in different places in their standards, but both have statements that basically say the most effective way to implement these safe work practices and guidance in this standard, and when they say this standard, they're referring to Z462 and 70E, is within the context of a safety management system. In the safety management system are things such as ANSI Z10 or ISO 45001. I think in Canada you have CSA Z 45001. And the OSHA documents that I mentioned a few minutes ago, they were modeled after the safety management system standards, but written in a way that's easier to understand than in the typical standards language or formats.
Mm.
Number two, or I won't rank these. One of the core elements of those safety management standards is employee engagement, worker engagement. And that's not just making them the subject of the program, of the safety program.
Mm.
That's involving workers in the development of the program. Now, a lot of small organizations, they hire a consultant. You may do this for some of your clients, I don't know, but hire a consultant to give them an electrical safety document, a documented program. Too many times I've seen that's taken and then put in a notebook and it goes in a shelf somewhere.
Yep.
And they feel like they satisfy their obligation. But when we talk about engaging workers, it's about taking that program, not just training them on what the program states, but involving them to critique what's written. Does this make sense? Does this address, do you understand this?
Mm-hmm.
What would you what do we need to do differently going beyond what was given to us in this program to make our work safer? That's employee engagement. And that's not just one time.
Mm-hmm.
That's on an ongoing basis. Using employees to do the training, not having the consultant doing the training or having the top safety supervisor doing the training. If you're not able to have employees do the training, then the employees don't understand what the standard is. Okay, what the requirements are.
That actually reminds me. Have you heard of the law of diffusion of innovation?
Yeah, you have to tell me more. I don't recognize that title.
So Simon Sinek have you heard of Simon Sinek? He wrote the book Start With Why.
Okay.
So it's a pretty famous book. He explains, and you could probably look this up on YouTube, the law of diffusion of innovation, and basically draws a bell curve. And he says to either have so imagine you're trying to sell a product, or you're trying to do cultural transformation. There's a certain spot on that bell curve that if you don't achieve, nothing's going to happen. And it's around 15%.
Yeah.
And so what he says is most businesses, when they want to do some cultural transformation, doesn't matter what it is, they hire a consultant, they write a program, they create a training package, they roll it out to everybody, and they think, there, we're good, done. And then it fails. And the reason is they haven't achieved that 15%.
You're right.
And so what that 15% is what he calls the early adopters.
Exactly.
And and so you have to find those early adopters. And that's exactly what you're talking about. I think it's if you get those employees who really want to see a safety program implemented, and you get them involved early in the development of, maybe they create the training. They're already they're talking to the rest of the group,
right,
throughout the whole program development. And that just reminded me of that.
Well, I've seen that data from a different source, in a different way, but the concept of the early innovators and the followers, and I'll call
Right.
it the other end, or the, you know,
The laggards.
the laggards,
Yeah.
is common. And in a large organization like we had at DuPont, we had plant sites. We had 150 plant sites. Okay,
Mm-hmm.
and we had had a few plant sites that based on the passion of certain individuals within their organization. They could have been an electrician, or it could have been a supervisor, it could have been a manager, or it could have been a safety. It could have been anyone in that organization. They were the spark to 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 enable that plant site to be an innovator on something, maybe not everything, but on
Mm-hmm.
something. And then another plant, because of their history, their culture, their uniqueness of their individuals, they were an innovator on something different, you know.
Mm-hmm.
And so what we were able to do is create what we called our electrical safety network that connected all of our plant sites around the world. We had operations in Europe and South America and Asia. And we had early innovators on something in electrical safety at almost every one of our sites. And so we created the culture that helped these plant sites and individuals to recognize, hey, we're not good at everything, that we're good at something, and we want to share that one good thing. And so we created, and the internet certainly helped our ability to do that when that came along, to share practices, to develop standard approaches. Where we created something we call our electrical safety management system, which we use globally around the world, and it was incorporated the best of the best
Mm-hmm.
from North America, Europe, South America, and Asia. And electrical safety had been approached a little differently in each of those regions. And but we came up with a way to incorporate the best of the best and engaged our network to flesh that out.
Yeah. No, I think
And
that's
yeah, and so we were able to do that, and that's why conferences that you mentioned, the IEEE Electrical Safety Workshop, is an example of bringing people together from lots of different organizations and cultures to talk about possibilities, innovative solutions that maybe one day may be in a standard. But I've seen many things that are currently in standards and regulations were in practice for 25 years before they were adopted and put into a standard, adopted by at least, I'll call it the early innovators. Okay.
Yep.
Well,
Yeah, no, that's I mean that's a great maybe place to even to wrap up this conversation. I want to respect your time, and I know we it's a good example too for those larger organizations. Is something they can do, bring in the early adopters, and maybe even organize a group like that. I guess just on closing, is there anything, Lanny? I know you just attended a couple of big conferences. You got anything coming up in the near future, or maybe even you mentioned the IEEE, so we can actually we'll link to the next IEEE, which I think would be about a year from now in 2016.
yeah.
Anything else you'd urge people to check out and maybe visit, or something that you're doing that you'd want to share?
Well, I do webinars throughout the year. I've got one I'm doing with Mike Daugherty from Canada. We're doing one for plant engineering on May 29th. Mike was the chair of the first launch of CSA Z462 in Canada, and was a member of the NFPA 70E committee for a number of years. I look at him as an innovator in electrical safety. So we're doing one together for plant engineering. I'm not sure if this helps your listeners too much, but I'm speaking at a conference in Australia in May. Um, uh, I think the conference is actually in Perth, Australia.
Yeah.
And uh, you know, I don't I'm hesitant to mention this because I don't want this to sound like a sales pitch, but I have a book being published later this year, maybe late summer. It's built on my experiences in electrical safety over my 50-year career. Hopefully, it'll be useful to some folks.
Yeah, no,
But again, I won't go into. I don't like to talk about that in
I
a
wouldn't worry
context
about
like
that. I
this.
mean, this is, I mean, we try not to
Yeah,
treat this podcast like that, but I mean, that is something that certainly everybody who listens to this podcast would want to know about. So I'd encourage you, Laney, to speak about it. And you know what we'll do is we'll get some information from you after the
sure.
chat here, and we'll link
Yeah.
to anything in the show notes.
Well, there's one thing I'd like to end with a quote. You said we're getting close here, so if I could add one last thing, and it just ties into what we were just talking about, and the early innovators, and the followers and the laggards. There's a management consultant. He passed away several years ago by the name of Warren Bennis. And he said, examples of mediocrity are everywhere. He says, if you want, and I'm paraphrasing because I don't have the quotes right in front of me. If you want to really improve your organization, you need to look for examples of excellence. Okay, and that's hard.
Mm-hmm.
Because as he's first part of that, the examples of the ordinary. I think he uses the ordinary, the term ordinary. The examples of the ordinary are everywhere. You do benchmarking, you may say, oh, we want to benchmark with some folks. Well, who are we benchmarking with? Are they just average? Or are they the best, the world's best? There's where the real opportunities are, is to compare your practices with the world's best. And identifying who is best can be a challenge sometimes because they may not be that obvious that they are. You really have to dig and search and ask questions about the people that are going beyond that simple compliance and are examples of that early innovators in something that's really going to help transform their organization. That's why they're doing it. And those of us that are maybe not in that early innovator category,
Mm-hmm.
can we learn from them and apply their ideas to our unique work environments?
That's great. Thanks so much, Laney.
John, it's always a pleasure. I wish the best to you, and also all the best to your listeners. These podcasts, I've watched most of them, are extremely valuable and really helpful to stimulate thinking. I see that's the purpose of your podcast, is to stimulate thinking. How could this apply to our organizations? What could we do differently? Okay. Thanks, Sean.